Welcome to the Japan Business Show. My name is Eric Ahona, and today I am talking with Nozomi Morgan. Nozomi is an executive coach for Michiki Morgan, and you're helping Japanese as well as US corporation with cross-cultural communication. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me today.
One question right away.
Yes.
Have you ever tried a cold plunge?
Cold plunge? No, I have not.
Well, then maybe today will be the first time because I'm going to start with a cold plunge question.
Oh no, okay.
So my question is, what is, in your opinion,
Yeah.
the biggest culture gap between Japan and the US?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And let me think for a second. What's the biggest cultural gap? So let me answer starting out with, I was just having this conversation with one of my clients yesterday. And she is a Japanese professional, actually Japanese executive, who has worked in the US. She was an expat in the US and now is back, working in Japan. And we were having this conversation. So interesting enough, I actually think people typically focus on that gap, right? What's the difference between Japanese business and US business, or Japanese professionals and US professionals, or Japanese decision-making process and US decision-making process. There's a lot of differences that we focus on, but surprisingly, what I have found out working with more than 500 senior business leaders and global teams over the past 10 years with Michiki Morgan worldwide, and over 25 years of working between these two cultures professionally, is that actually there's not that big of a gap when it comes to the two countries. I would say the true gap is very, very personal and individual, because we were talking, actually, like I was talking to the client yesterday, was there's a lot of typically, going back to the perception is, when it comes to the biggest gap is, Japanese are very conservative.
Correct. Yeah.
They are risk averse, right? You hear that all the time. They're very slow in decision making because it's a consensus based decision making process. Yes. We see that depending on American companies, depending on the industry, depending on the maturity of the business or where it is, we see the same thing happening as well. So it really depends on, again, the industry, who the leader is, the maturity of the company. Like obviously startups, they make decision on the fly. That's the same in Japan too. So it's not so much what's the biggest gap between those two cultures. Actually, it really comes down to that individual human being who is the leader, or the DNA of that company. So I know I'm not giving you a straight answer, but that truly last night I was on a call late. We're Eastern time, like at 10 p.m. Talking to this client in Japan, and we were just having that conversation.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And you don't have to apologize, because my question was also not very specific, was very general.
Yeah.
So allow me to rephrase it a bit more specific.
Yeah, please do.
So for example, if we talk about, because maybe some of the viewers are working either with US, or let's say Western, or Japanese mid-level managers to move business forward, to maybe find a distributor in Japan, or like get their foot into the Japanese market. And most of them would like to know, what is something that I can do to better understand how this Japanese mid-level manager is working versus a US mid-level manager? What are the responsibilities? What are the challenges? How can I better understand how he's making his decisions?
So from that perspective, I think the biggest difference is that Japanese managers, or Japanese, typically I would say, is that you really have to take your time to create a relationship and build trust. So it's interesting. So US companies or US managers may often actually buy from you or make the decision to work with you if you have a good product, if your pricing is right, if you have a compelling reason for them to switch over to you, because they see that benefit, like a short-term benefit. Like, okay, your price is better, like why not? Or your product is newer, why not? Or you're giving me a discount, why not? But I think typically with Japanese companies, especially if they already have an existing vendor that they're using, they're like, if there's no problem, why would we, go, through this hassle of working with someone new when what we have is okay? It might not be the best, but we're perfectly fine with it. We're not complaining. We're okay. Because going back to the conversation we just had about, they typically, we talk about how Japanese are risk averse. There's a lot of the decision-making process. There's a lot of steps that they have to go through, which is extra work in their mind. So from them, they're typically they would say like, oh, why would I bother? So that's where, if you really want to do business with Japanese companies, is that the number one thing I would say, if there's any skill that you have to master, would be to be very, 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 very patient and not assume just because you have an amazing presentation and you have such a valid reason, for them to buy your product or work with you or whatever, that is, they will not make a decision or buying decision immediately. It might be, and not to, make people feel like let down anyone, but it might be years of just building that relationship with that manager. And you know this better than anyone else, but once you have that Japanese company as a customer, they'll stay with you literally forever. Yes. So you really need to look at this as a long-term, almost like a lifelong, commitment to them. So I would use the analogy of, instead of like one-night stands, you're really looking for a long-term, like a marriage with them. And you wouldn't want to, marry someone the first time you meet them. Yes. So you really you want to get to know their parents, their relatives, their siblings, and you need everyone to say, yes, I would love you to marry that person. That's when you typically can win over. And once they become your client, they're the most amazing clients ever, because they'll stay with you. So there's always two sides to the coin. Exactly.
Amazing. And I fully agree to what you're saying. Just remembered two things. One example, when a US client of mine came to Japan to visit actually the Japanese business partner, and he had prepared everything, the price was right, everything was right. And then they were in the meeting, and they're okay, this is the meeting where we're going to make a decision. And I already tried to kind of calm him down, say, look, there might not be a decision in the meeting, because in Japan, a meeting is not to make a decision, it's to transmit a message. So you're there basically, you don't have to say that you make the decision that you want to work with. You say, well, this is the message that we've decided we will tell you here and now. And then the other party will tell you the message that they have internally decided on. But that it really happens that, okay, let's go for it, that will very, very rarely happen in a meeting.
Right.
So it's like the patience that you were just mentioning, and not thinking about a one-night stand, but thinking about a long-term marriage. That's also something that a lot of US clients feel, that the Japanese business partners are driving them crazy with requests over requests, whereas they're testing them to see if things happen, how will they react? Will they react patiently? And will they reply diligently to our questions? Or will they be like nervous and say, oh, we don't have time for this? So this is a very good point. The patience part, I really 100% agree with that. So now, circling back, you masterfully completed the cold plunge. So that was
Thank
wonderful.
you. Okay, well now I can check that out.
So now let's circle back a little bit, and I'd really like to hear a bit about your background, how you came to help companies to become boundaryless, like you're saying. That's a very interesting story. I would love you to share with the audience.
Oh, thank you. So just for those who probably have never heard, like, what the heck is boundaryless? And it's actually a really hard word for me to even pronounce. It's like 3 syllables. It's a little bit too long. No, but we have a framework that we use, and it's called Boundaryless Leadership. And we have defined the leaders that we really believe, and this again goes back to working with more than 500 senior leaders at global companies and teams, and really looking at what makes and how can you really increase that intercultural collaboration. So boundaryless leaders are leaders who can really navigate beyond those boundaries and borders and boundaries, because our clients are companies that are multinational global companies. So Eric, you mentioned in the introduction that we work with Japanese companies here in the US. Yes, we absolutely do. And we work with any foreign-owned companies here in the US. So it could be German, it could be Chinese, Korean, because again, obviously the culture is different, but the principles are same, that it's intercultural. Yes. And we also work with many US-based, US headquartered companies that have operations in Japan and Asia. So we have projects and clients that are headquartered, here in the US, and they have, because if you're a multinational company, you will have operations in Asia, right? And if you don't, you want to expand there. Yes. So we typically work with companies that have offices in Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong, Shanghai, Beijing, and we work with them. So it's really important, regardless of where you have your headquarters and you have your subsidiaries and locations, is that they always, always, always have to work together, right? And that's where the intercultural place comes in. And so actually, sometimes to make the conversation easier, I would say, oh, it's cross-cultural. But the truth is, cross means only one-to-one, right? You're only across the table, which means this is cross communication because it's the two of us. But and the reality in this world is it's never just 2 cultures. It's always more. If you have 3 people, it's going to be 3 different cultures. Yeah. And so we like to call it intercultural, leadership or intercultural communication, because that fits more of the environment that our clients are in. And another thing is, what we really define culture is not as a country culture. Like, for example, you really have experienced a lot of cultures in your life, right? So it's not just, you live in the US, but you actually live in a very unique place in the US. I'm sure your audience knows that you live in Miami, which even in the US is kind of like a different country. And you're not from here. Like, where are you from, right? You're from Germany. And even in Germany, there's different distinctive cultures depending on where you're from. And I always ask this question when I talk to people or first-time clients, is that, so do you have siblings?
I don't.
You don't?
I don't.
Do you have cousins?
I do, but I'm not
close.
Close, yes.
Okay. So typically if you have, and I actually am an only child too, so we have that in common. But actually, let's. Well, your kids are a little bit young, but just imagine your 2 kids right now. Do you think they'll be exactly alike when they grow up?
Absolutely not. They're already not.
They're already not.
Yes.
Right? So they already have their own culture, but they came out of the same parents. They live under the same roof. You have a baby, so they don't eat the same food yet, but they probably will, right, in the next couple of years. So even though you're in the exact same environment, basically identical, you are different. And that's why when we talk about culture, we really don't want people to get too hung up on the country culture, because you can grow up in the same household and become very different. I always tell this story. My husband, although I do not have siblings, so I cannot tell my own story from that perspective, but my husband has 2 brothers, and he's the eldest. And his middle brother, right, he's in between my husband, the eldest, and there's the youngest brother, and there's a middle brother. They all grew up in the same house, but somehow the middle brother has a different accent.
Okay.
Why? I don't know. Right? I mean, it's not like he was shipped off somewhere else, and he's in the middle, not the youngest, not the oldest. He's in the middle. Why? it goes back to, it's different culture, right? It's something that he was attracted to. Probably he heard the way, probably the people he hung out with. So really when you say culture, and this comes back to boundaryless leadership, is that the leaders today need more than any time before to really be able to be flexible and really be able to pay attention to that diversity that they have on their team. And it doesn't matter what country you are in. This is the same. You can be in Japan, you can be in Germany, you can be in Korea, you can be in China, like India, US. Really in today's world, you can live in that same house, you can be from the same tribe, you can live in the same village, but you are very, very different. And that is just extremely important for these leaders to be able to navigate through that. Because the biggest mistake that we see, or the pitfalls for leaders that are not being so-called not good leaders anymore, are the ones that assume and expect everyone operates and have the same value systems as they do. And old days, that probably was true. I mean, everyone was different, but we all kind of operated on the same system. So that's the old side of leadership. And today, you really have to pay more attention to really each individual. And that's why, especially the skills, like listening skills, are so important to actually not just hear what they said, right? Not just the little words, but actually who they are, where that's coming from, right? When they say something and it's something that you don't kind of agree with, instead of just, just counting them off and just say, oh, that person is useless or doesn't understand, you really have to ask the question of, like, what is this? What does this person really mean? Where is this coming from? Yes. Because you might misinterpret what their full intention is. And so the leader today really needs to learn how to full body listen at these different levels, and also be able to, and that's the part that you really have to create that connection. So not just surface level, like, oh, how are you? And not really expecting the answer, which in American English, we always say, how are you? But no one really expect them to answer truly how you are. You just say, I'm okay, I'm great. But that's just like, hi, hello. It doesn't mean anything. But today they really need to ask truly, like, how are you? Right? There's so many mental health issues, loneliness, burnout, all of that. It comes because people are not connected anymore. They don't feel like they're cared. So all of that to say, that's what boundary leadership is. And that's the work that we do, helping companies kind of come back full circle. Is, when we talk to senior executives today in the US, Japan, and Asia, the first thing that comes out is they all want to be more innovative. They want to do things differently. They might say it a little bit differently, but they know the way they've been doing this in the past is not going to cut if they really want to have, strong business results in the future. Even with the so-called really risk-averse Japanese companies, they all are talking about, we need to be more innovative. If you look at their websites, that's all that they say. And maybe the speed of the innovation might look a little bit different, but they still want to be innovative, right? So how do you do that? You can't do that with thinking the same, doing the same old way. It's just impossible, right? So even with the so-called country culture that is typically, I will just use the word homogeneous. I know it's not true, but in a sense, just be stereotypical. But compared to the U.S., it's typically created by people that come from the same race, right? There's only very small, still in Japan, it's very small numbers of people that are from different countries that work in Japan, work in these companies compared to the U.S., compared to other countries. The immigration is very low in Japan and all that. So anyhow, even with those type of country cultures or countries, still they need to innovate. Still there's so much diversity, because there's diversity in thought. You might look more or less the same, but you think differently. And like in Japan, when you talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, we're talking a lot about empowering women and really promoting women in the workforce, that too is a different perspective. So there's so many like diverse perspectives and fresh perspectives that the Japanese companies really need to start paying attention to and leveraging if they truly want to, survive in this global, really competitive environment. And I think a lot of Japanese, so we work with a lot of so-called, the big major Japanese companies, and I know they feel that urgency, and that's why they've been doing so many like merger and acquisitions, right? Because they're trying to, doing that organically takes a long time, so they're buying all these new companies and ideas, but they need to pay more attention to the people that they already have, because there's so much diversity in there. And if they're not doing that, they're basically wasting the talent. So I know the question was a little different.
No, I loved it. And actually, I would like to continue or actually talk about the part that you were hesitant on saying, the homogenous part.
Yeah.
Because when I was in Japan for a longer period for the first time in high school, and I was 17, and I was part of the kendo club. Oh. So I already started with kendo before going to Japan, and I was practicing kendo in a very German environment at the university. I was still a high school student, but I was at the university. I was the youngest, and they treated me really well and nice, and I went to Japan for my high school exchange. And I was also part of the kendo club. And we trained very hard, 6 days a week, even on Saturdays. And the first thing that happened to me, I remember, where I felt, okay, this is my first real cultural experience. Of course, there is the minute that you put your foot on Japanese ground, there's a cultural experience. But my really deep cultural experience was when all the kohai, so the ninensei, or like the ones that were not about to graduate, but they were like in high school, second grade.
Second.
And then third graders were also training, and we were all like, after like an hour of really hard training, we were done. But the second graders, so the kohai, had to give or bring tea to the senpai. And I was like, all right. And of course, I didn't say anything. I was doing the same as well, and pouring like a cup and giving it to a senpai and so on, very politely and so on, like looking what everybody's doing, not to do anything wrong. But then I asked my colleague that was also in the same classroom, why do we need to do that? I mean, we do the same training, we sweat the same, we do the same stuff, and they're just 1 year older, that's it. And he was telling me, KY da ne. So, and I was like, all right, KY, looking at my, KY. So
what kanji is that?
It's like, what's that? So just for the audience, KY means like, it's the abbreviation for kuki yomenai. You can't read the air.
Right.
So I found out about what KY meant, and I asked myself, okay, why did I actually ask that question? Why is it so obvious for everybody else that you don't ask that question? Did they actually ask that question, or did they just grow up and say, okay, that's how it's done, so they don't ask the question? And I think it's the latter. So what I have found, and again, this is from my experiences, that in fact it is more homogeneous, because you don't have to mention as much or express your opinion or what you think, because people usually tend to think the same in certain social patterns. Whereas in a country like especially the US that lives from immigration, I mean, all this, we're both not
we're not
natives,
from here,
not from here. The majority of people here in Miami are not from here either. So what I found out is that the more cultural diversity there is, the more difficult it gets to really understand what's the social pattern. The more you have to communicate to understand what's going on, the more you have to talk.
Yeah.
And the less, let's say, diversity or immigration or whatever there is, the less you actually have to talk, and the more nonverbal communication is happening. So people understand without really communicating verbally.
Yep.
And what I wanted to ask you is, working with Japanese companies, working with Japanese individuals that are used to, allow me to say the word again, a homogeneous environment where they don't need to say anything. They just look to the side and everybody knows. Or they just sit down and make, well, like, you know,
they just grunt.
Oh, okay.
Or they sigh.
You know, exactly. And everybody, oh, okay. And everybody's moving. This is not happening here. And people that are sometimes very well trained, sometimes they're not that well trained. They come here and they're like, why is not everybody doing what they're supposed to do? I don't need to say that. I've never had to say that. So I'm just curious how you have experienced, or what your experiences are with people that come to the US like that, and then they're surprised that things are not working the same way as in a homogeneous environment.
So everything you said, so true, right? And so I typically tell non-Japanese when they say, oh, what do I need to learn to, work with Japanese? I joke, this is a joke, totally a joke, but I tell them, you need to develop your sixth sense.
Ooh.
Because it's not going to be written, they're not going to tell you, you have to figure it out, right? That the kukyoma basically means you can't read the air, so it's in the air, you can't see it, so you have to have a sixth sense. You really have to use your intuition and figure out, like, wait, is something like wrong? Just like you felt, right? You were like, there's something like odd going on here. And you need to be, so you really have to be sensitive. And so that's what I tell them. And that's something that, to your point, people that grow up, and for folks that are into communication or into like cross-culture, intercultural communication or culture, you've heard the high context, low context culture. So Japanese are in the high context. So when you say high context, meaning it's really contextual. So you really have to understand the context. And therefore, if you're in that same context, you operate in the same way. You behave because you have that same understanding. Which, as if you're a low context culture, which a lot of the Western cultures are like that, you're very direct because you have to ask the question, because we don't know what's going on. So I need to know. So that's the difference. And so going back to, like you said, that's so true. So even within Japanese, they will tell other people, if you can't read the between the lines, that's a skill that you have to learn, right? Like, that's really valued, that that you can sense what to do or what needs to be done without being told. So that is a huge value, skill in Japan that's valued. So there's another word or phrase in Japanese that we talk about, aun no kokyu. So if I say a, you say un, meaning it's understood what to do. And again, that's considered like the beauty of Japanese culture. So that's the part that, especially if you're American going to Japan, you have to understand that there's a lot of actually communication going on within silence. And that's something I talk a lot about when is silence is golden. There's so much beauty, information actually in the silence, which, especially for Americans, silence is just dead, right? And they're afraid of silence because they feel like they're not adding value to the conversation or to the meeting. But in the Japanese culture, actually a lot of things are going on in that silence.
It is like, part of relationship.
It is part of a relationship. Yes, exactly. So people that talk too much actually are not valued as a strong leader. If you're chatty, you're not calm. It almost means that you're not well put together. You don't know what you're doing. You're just, so there's a lot of that different cultural value, and it shows up in leadership a lot too. But going back to your question about, so for Japanese that come here, so that's the part that, going back to, it actually is universal. So there's Americans who are like that too, that think like, oh, but they should know, right? we call it common sense. And the first thing in today's world that regardless of where you are, that we talk a lot about is that there is no thing such as common sense anymore. If you believe that, then you're going to have a hard time because people are going to disappoint you left and right. I mean, going back to the family dynamic, your children do not do what they are supposed to do. Like, they do not do what you want them to do. And if your children who grew up and knows exactly what you're supposed to do is not going to do it, like, how would anyone in the workplace who has not been with you more than 8 hours a day, why would they do anything? Like, how would they know what you want them to do? So actually, it's a complete illusion that, like, it's the good old days. And this is another thing. When someone says, oh, you know, I wish we can go back to the good old days, like, that's a red flag to me when I hear that. It's like, okay, because the good old days is never coming back. Well, the first thing is you can't go back ever. We're always moving forward. And if you're the type of person, especially if you're a leader, that says, oh, I just wish we can go back to the good old days, they don't have the right leadership mindset. Because change every single day, like, all our cells, they're continuously dying and reborning? No, is that a word? Reproducing, thank you. So if that's the case, you know, yeah, if with that mindset, you will never be able to really capture what's going on right now. So the same thing with Japanese coming here. First of all, the second that they get off that plane, they have to know that it's not going to be the same. So any assumption that they have, they just have to drop it. And I know that's hard. It's easier said than done. And so when I say drop it, literally it's hard to drop that. But what I always, you know, emphasize on them is just be really curious. So we talk about becoming a cultural learner. So learners are always curious, right? Just like the first time going to a new country, you're like, oh, I want to try this food, or I want to go there. You're just learning. And that's really if you really want to be that boundaryless leader, that inclusive leader, that leader in today's world that is really impactful and can make a difference and be that good leader that people really want to work with, you really need to be a learner. And like, going back to the question we kind of asked earlier, is like, I wonder why this person did this in this way, instead of being like, why didn't you do it this way? It's like, I wonder why. Like, where does this come from? What is the thought process? And, you know, think about that, but then ask that question instead of assuming they did it wrong or assuming they didn't understand. Because the truth is, if they didn't do it in the way that you expected them to do it, part of that is your responsibility that you didn't communicate that clearly, right? In the Japanese culture, the only reason why it's done the same way is because you have gone through a very similar education system. Mostly the people who work in that company has worked at the same company forever together. And a lot of things are built upon best practices, which means there's been example in the past. So you have something to model it off. Which as when you come to a new country, you don't have that same they don't have a template to follow. So whatever template you have back then is a different template. You can't apply template A to situation B, right? So that in itself, again, is an illusion that they're just carrying, which what I would really say is if they continue to hold on to that, it's just gonna, you know, really eat them alive, and they'll suffer more and more. And people who are like that, we call them cultural critics. So they're the ones who will be like, I'm right, you're wrong. The way I do it is the right way. You're doing it wrong. So I hate to say this, but we hear this, and I don't hear it as much anymore. The old days, and you might have experienced this too. There will be Japanese managers or engineers that come to the U.S. and they'll have to train the American engineers, or people work at these manufacturing sites, and they will just say, "Oh, Americans are so dumb. Oh, they don't work hard." All those things. And that again comes from the way that we do things, or they're not detail oriented. They don't pay attention. They don't take notes. They don't listen. They ask so many questions. Like, why can't they just listen? Because I told them. That all comes back to going back to they're a critic of that person. So they're critiquing what's wrong and not being really curious of being that learner of, oh, I want to learn about you so that we can actually help you. Right? Because at the end of the day, if you don't understand, there's a reason why, right? No one goes out of the way like, today I don't want to understand what my boss is saying. They all want to, but there's somewhere in between, there's a disconnect. So that's where it's really important to not be that stuck in your way critic, and really becoming that learner that always have a beginner's kind of mind, like being really curious, being really open.
Becoming a facilitator for the understanding or for the other person to bridge that cultural gap. Right?
And that's what we call leading with humility.
Yes.
So being really humble, knowing that each person, and this kind of gets a little bit spiritual in a place, is that every person who's on earth, like literally, so everyone in your workplace, anyone on the team, they have something to bring to the table. But it's really the leader's responsibility to have that open heart, open mind to see what that is. And you both have to come, meet in the middle in that sense. So you can't, if you already decided that that person is not competent or whatever, then of course you'll never be able to see that, right? Because you already decided. So again, going back to a lot of times, I haven't seen this a lot, but in the old days, it would be like Americans are this, Americans are that. If they've already decided that, that's what they're going to see. But if you could be like, oh, let's see what I'm going to see, right? And if you can be open about that, and just instead of judging what's happening, and just really just be curious and just be like, why? Just, I wonder, and just have conversations around that. It would be so much more... I would use the word fun. I know a lot of people might not resonate with the word fun, but it would be so much more freeing, I think, on both ends, especially for the manager that has a big task to get things done, right? They come with a mission. They, for example, transferring knowledge to the Americans who, when they opened a site here, they have a very important mission that these engineers, these specialists that have been doing this for 30 years, brings their knowledge, all their knowledge from Japan to the States. It's important, I know, and sometimes because there's like so important, like white knuckling important, that they just cannot, they only know how to do things one way, and anything that deviates from that one way is bad way. Like there's no in between, like, oh, these people, are very different, so let's approach this in a different way. It just does not come naturally. So that's where with Boundaryless leadership, that's one of the things that we really talk about and help to, how can you really flex that muscle of being like curious, but down in the very core is that you have to believe that everyone has good intentions. And I think that's so important, going back to, if you decide like, oh, these people, are just here for the money or whatever. If they decide that's the case, then that's what you'll never really see the true talent, the true beauty, the true gift that person has. So, and this is something, I don't know, sometimes it's hard to teach, train, and all that, but really having that true belief that people really want to do better. They're really good if they have that opportunity to do so. And I think that's really truly the responsibility for the company. So when we talk about, we do a lot of corporate culture work, and that's one thing that we really want to make sure that if it's not a company that truly believes in that, it doesn't matter how great the vision is, how their values are written on their website, because you can hire someone to do that. If they truly don't believe that, it comes through. So it could be really messy, rough, and the words might be not the most beautiful words that you use. But and that goes back to why a lot of times Japanese managers say, "Oh, but my English is not good." Mm-hmm. It does not matter. Mm-hmm. You can be super fluent, but if you don't have that true heart, it doesn't matter how fluent you are.
And I remember when I was sent to Japan as a high school student for the first time.
Yeah.
They actually didn't do a specific Japan training.
Uh-huh.
But what they did and what served me, I think, the most, I still remember it to this day.
Yeah.
And it's over 29 years ago. Anyway.
Yeah.
I still remember it. They said, it's not right, because in the beginning you will be like, oh, it's amazing, I love it. And after a while, you will become frustrated because of your limitations, language, culture, socially. And then you say, oh, that's wrong. So it's not right in the beginning. Don't go overboard with your fascination. And on the other hand, it's not wrong. Mm-hmm. It's different.
Yeah.
So it's not right, it's not wrong, it's different. And to this day, that has really helped me to maneuver in cross-cultural situations, not only in Japan, but in other environments as well.
I love that.
I really also like what you were saying in regards to the middle manager, or let's say the engineer or the manager coming here, and the moment that he leaves the plane, maybe on Japan Airlines where everything's in Japanese, and then suddenly arriving in Atlanta, or I don't know, do they fly to Atlanta? Well,
not Japan Airlines, but yes, Delta flies directly.
Yes, Delta. There you go. So the moment that they arrive, they should, I like that you said it very easily understandable. They need to drop that attitude that they expect that everything works the Japanese way. Now, we have met actually at a Southeast US Japan joint meeting, which is like a big symposium of companies of the 7 southeastern states in the United States and Japanese representatives. But we reconnected because I was, by coincidence, listening to your podcast.
Yes.
And it really resonated. I listened to the very first one, and it really resonated, your story with me. And one thing that you said, which I really liked, was, and it's a little bit referring to I assume what you maybe also are discussing, or how you're coaching the Japanese managers, is that, I'm paraphrasing here, but you were saying along the lines of, if you don't really know yourself, you can't connect with other people. Mm-hmm. Please elaborate on that a little bit.
Did I really say that? No. Yeah. So, well, the thing is, I mean, you can. When I mean by that, it doesn't mean that you have to set in stone know exactly who you are. I'm not talking about like it's written out, like it's a definition on a dictionary, that kind of clarity. Mm-hmm. But what I mean by that is, if you're not sure about yourself, if you're constantly comparing yourself to others, it's really hard to connect with others, because you see that person as a competition. You see that person as like you're looking at that person not truly as who that person is, but you're positioning that person somewhere on your map, because you're not anchored, because you're also positioning yourself somewhere too. That's what I find when I say, if you don't know yourself, because if you know yourself, really doesn't matter where everyone else is, right? You know you're right here. And you can really look at that person and sit with that person without judging, without comparing, and just really listen and see that person as who that person is. For example, and this is my own, definitely, not perfect, and daily learn. And I know until the day we die, until my last breath, we're consistently evolving, learning. And but I remember when I was, even as a child, I always felt envious of my classmates if it was someone who maybe like their parents were very very kind, or if they would go on vacation somewhere, or if they lived in a nicer house, or if they had a better car, or if they had in Japan, we're all about pencil cases, right? Remember?
Yeah.
And again, I'm dating myself. I don't know how the kids are today, to be honest. This might not be a thing anymore. Who writes with pencils anymore? But anyhow, I do. But back in the days, it used to be like this pencil case that had so many little like pockets and things you can open up. Mm-hmm. And whoever had the most like numbers of little pencil cases, or who would have the newest and latest one. Like there's so many things that I would compare myself to that I did not have. So I was looking at the world from a place of lack, mm-hmm. what I don't want, what I don't have, and you're kind of defining yourself from that place. And I was always envious of what other people had. So whenever I really remember the feeling of when I was talking to someone. Like the nuance, like the place you're coming from is from that jealousy, envious, like I wish I could be like you. Mm-hmm. I wish I could have things like you. And maybe I didn't say it exactly that way, but I know it was coming through. So even if, say, the person had, let's say they had a beautiful, nice, they're wearing a beautiful, nice like top, mm-hmm. because we're girls, and mm-hmm. Back in the days, it's all about what you're wearing. But instead of being like, oh, that's so beautiful, it looks so good on you, I think even if I said that, I wouldn't be able to truly mean that, mm-hmm. right? You're kind of saying it like, mm-hmm. oh, that's so nice. Like, mm-hmm. you're so lucky that you get your parents, buy you new stuff. Would be like behind this, like that ugly thought that you really have. And that's where, if you don't know yourself, that's what happens. So as a grown-up, I've used pencil cases and tops as an example, but as grown-ups, it's the same thing. As a leader, and this is what I see in a lot of leaders, really good leaders know their strengths, know their weaknesses, know who they are. Mm-hmm. So they know that in order to create a strong team, a good team, I need to get people that are better than I am. Right?
Yes.
You don't want someone who's less meaning not less value, but can do the same thing that if you're really good at A, you don't need someone who's really good at A. You want someone who's really good at B, C, D, and E, mm-hmm. because you're like, I got the A part, mm-hmm. but I don't have the B, C, D, and E part. And that's what really creates a great team. And that's when you can really respect each person, what they bring to the table, because you're just like, oh my God, thank God, like you all are so good at this. Mm-hmm. But if you don't know yourself and you feel like you have to be that strong, know-it-all leader, because that's what leaders are, mm-hmm. then you're constantly looking for people that you're comparing yourself to other people. And what happens is that you're not able to really leverage that person because you feel like you're always in fear. Right? Oh, if this person shines too much, then maybe they might get promoted and I might look like I'm not that great, right? And that's where then you're never going to be able to connect with that person because you're always coming from a place of fear and you don't really, really, really want to get to know the person. Mm-hmm. And then how can you be like, how can you have empathy? How can you really, care about that person? Because you're never really, again, connecting in that level as a person. You only are connecting at a very surface level. Because that comparison and because that insecurity that you have. So in the Boundaryless leadership, there's one of the elements or principles you may call that, and it's called kintsugi, which is a Japanese word. It's a Japanese actually art form, and what it is in English, I've named it or explained it as embracing imperfection. Mm-hmm. So kintsugi is an art form that, so in Japan, we this is very traditional, but there's an art of tea ceremony. Mm-hmm. So we have tea bowls, ceramic tea bowls, and they're very, very expensive, mm-hmm. and they break, mm-hmm. right? So in Japan, instead of throwing that away, they actually use golden lacquer to connect all the broken pieces and repair their pieces. And instead of saying, oh, this is a broken tea bowl, now it has become became something different, or evolved into now a tea bowl with these golden lacquer like lines in it. And that's what kintsugi is, because kin means gold and tsugi means to connect. So it's connecting pieces with the golden lacquer. And it's such a beautiful representation of, you can make, I guess what they call it in English, you can, when you get lemons, make lemonade.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what it is, right? Mm-hmm. So that's exactly what it is. All your imperfections, that's what makes you such a unique and beautiful person. So instead of looking at that as your weakness, if you can see it as how it really enriches you and makes you as a whole person, that's what I mean by really knowing yourself. And obviously the strengths, they shine, they come through, but it's really important to actually know. And I hate to call it weaknesses because it kind of sounds like it's good and bad, but really knowing the parts that you don't, care about, do so well. It's not like your best part. Like, knowing that is so freeing. Because if you know that, then you don't have to work so hard on it. I mean, if it's really important for your job, especially, when you're younger, there's some things, even if you're not good at it, you still have to do it because it's important as a professional. But the higher up you go, that's when you want to really bring in people and create a team, because I don't know how many people are on this earth, but trust me, there's enough people with different skills, and that's what companies are, right? It's not Bill Gates or Steve Jobs did not create Microsoft and Apple by themselves. They had brilliant people with them. So really, going back to boundaryless leaders, and if just leaders in general, they really, really need to know themselves so that they can really respect and honor these amazing talents that they have and leverage that. Because if you really look at the big picture, that is what will help the team to grow, and that will really lead to strong business results. So if you try to just shine yourself and be the strong leader, it totally defeats the purpose. And actually, those are leaders that are not the great leaders, I should say.
It's interesting that you mentioned Steve Jobs there. I think he was the one who was saying that you should always strive to get people on your team that are actually better than you are.
Yep.
And I think for that, and you mentioned that you need wisdom, a certain wisdom and a compassion to help others excel without the expectation that you want to excel. So you put yourself in the background and you help others to excel, and that's how you will automatically excel at some stage. Later. So that's actually the form of leadership that is, the right way to go.
If you look at like Richard Branson, he's he's like the poster child of, he is not expert in any of the businesses that he's successful in, but he's an amazing entrepreneur. His businesses have changed, a lot of them have changed the industry. So, and I've never met him, so I don't know him personally, but he's not a superhuman, right? We're all equally just human. We're built up with the same stuff. So if he can do it, anyone can do it, really. Obviously, he's worked hard to get there, but I'm just saying we all have that possibility that we can. And going back to the leadership, so if you work for a company and you don't have to be like a Richard Branson or Steve Jobs, but you can still really contribute to the company by being that good leader, by, like you just said, as helping others to be better, because that's really what leadership is about. If you just want to be really good at your job, you can be the expert, right? You can be an individual contributor. You don't have to be so-called manager. Another thing actually I want to clarify is we're using leaders kind of interchangeably with managers right now, but truly, and this connects to the question of knowing yourself, is I always, when we coach, train, and consult and do this help with the Boundaryless leadership programs, the first thing that we really want to make sure people understand is that you have to be the leader of yourself. Because I know this is kind of cliche, but if you can't lead yourself, like, how could you lead other people? And that goes back to why it's so important leading yourself means you have to know yourself, because if you don't know yourself, you can't lead yourself. And it really comes back to inner work. You have to work on yourself to become a better leader, better person. Another thing, I think there's a big disconnect is that when you talk about leadership, we talk about it in a workplace, but really if you want to be a good leader, and that's why self-leadership is so important, is that you have to be a leader all the time, at home, with friends, in the community. It doesn't matter. Leadership is not a doing, it's actually a being. So you are a leader, you be a leader. So I used to call this, and I kind of don't use this as much as I used to, but when I first started out, executive coaching, I really talked about leadership as a lifestyle. Like you live that way, like healthy lifestyle, right? You don't just eat healthy during lunch. You have to eat healthy the whole time. And it has to be consistent. And that's what really leadership is. So if you truly want to become a good leader, you really have to be a leader all the time. And that's why you can't force it. Because if it's forced, you'll burn out, you'll get tired, right? It's almost like when you're wearing this really tight suit, all day you want to take it off. You don't want to take off the leadership suit. It should be something that's super comfortable. And that's where I think people talk about like authenticity and all that. And what it truly means is going back to really knowing yourself. It doesn't mean you're going to be like lazy and sit on the couch all the time. That's fine. What it really means is being really comfortable in your skin and knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not good at, knowing, how you communicate well, knowing when you don't. Like all of that is really what knowing yourself means. It doesn't mean that, you're going to be perfect or anything like that.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
I would like to ask one specific example where you had talking about leadership and becoming a better leader, making maybe a Japanese manager a boundaryless leader. Thank you. Where did you have a specific case, without mentioning any names, of course, where you had a challenge and then you took that challenge to see the process of becoming a boundaryless leader that was able to accomplish what a good leader
so that's such a great question. So we had a expat that was tasked to start a new a new operations in the US. So this was something that it used to be done in Japan, but they realized that to serve the US customers, if we have to keep on asking Japan to produce it, it takes too much time, right? Obviously, physically, it takes time to bring it over here. So the company made the decision to bring that technology, actually this production technology, to the US. So this manager came over and had to start a new team, knew everything. And for him, so he was really and the company hired us because the HR was getting a lot of complaints from the team, saying this manager, like the team just does not like this manager. He micromanages. They said it in different ways, but the complaint, was a little more colorful. But at the end of the day, it was more like micromanaging. They feel like they're disrespected. They just don't, some are saying they can't work with him, which is a big problem because this needed to launch in the US to serve their customers. Unless basically it's a competitive edge to them if they can produce this service, this product faster, to the market. It's a really highly customized product that again only had that technology to do it in Japan. So bringing it to the US was a very important thing for this company. Anyhow, so the manager had a big mission, right? A lot of pressure to do this right. And because it's a certain technology that really need highly skilled people, they gathered people in the US that are a lot of experience, right? They're all very proud and have a lot of pride in what they do.
Yes.
They're the best in their company. And so this manager, the Japanese manager, came, and they even had local Japanese that have been in this company for a long time too. So he was not the only so-called Japanese speaker on this team. So again, going back to complaints from the HR, we get the call, we need help because if we don't, we're going to lose these people, and we can't lose these people, right? They're important. And so we're like, okay. And that's where, we really sat down, with the manager. And what we found out, he's a great person. He's so nice. So then the question is, where are all these complaints coming from? Because when we sit down and talk to him, he's very nice. There's everything, all those complaints, the kind of the reports that we heard, can't see where this is coming from. Sometimes we can. Sometimes you sit down with someone, you're like, okay, I know what, it's obvious. But in his case, that wasn't what it was. He was a very, very nice person. So what we do, especially with executive coaching, is actually we have a very robust process. And we call it the first phase, a discovery phase. So we go in and interview people, and we also do a 360 and see what's really going on. Because again, just talking to you or to him is like, it's not that obvious. So then we went in and did that discovery phase, and like, oh, okay, I get it. So this is a very, almost like a classic case of his vision of perception of things, how they should be, and the reality are very different. And he wasn't able to make the connection. So he was trying to basically force like a square peg into like a round hole, just trying to force. And the receiving end, so all the locals are basically like giving up because they're being forced, and they don't understand why they have to do certain things. And that goes back to what you were saying earlier about, he assumes that everyone operates basically on the same understanding without realizing that it's not just technical part that they need to learn. They have to understand why you do things in certain ways. Why do we have to do this? Because Americans had so many questions of, well, why do we have to do this? Why can't we do it this way? But especially for those who know the Japanese ways, you don't question how things have already been done. So the question itself is a problem. And so he would get frustrated by just anyone asking him a question, and then he keeps on saying, basically shut up and just do it, is what ended up happening. And as you know, in the US, shut up and just doing it is not the right answer, right? That's a very quick way to lose everyone. And so the Japanese manager was finding other ways to basically just force them to do things. And that's why quickly things blew up. So going back to then, how do we help them walk through that, is really then going from, helping him to going back to really that connection, understanding that each person is here, really they want to do their best, and they have the best talent in this team, and helping him to really understand, like, you have an amazing team, and it's really on you to really respect and honor, their experience, because he's actually the guest here, right? But that's the part a lot of times, and this again just doesn't happen just in Japanese culture. But when you come from the headquarters, typically you'd forget that you're the guest. You feel, and maybe this might be the best language to use, but they almost see themselves as like the master, right? I'm the master person. You listen to me. And so really helping him to understand that, no, that's not how people like to be treated. You have to be just a person.
Usually, sorry to interrupt, usually it's the attitude, this subsidiary only exists because headquarters decided to. So you're like the son or the daughter, and you have to listen what I tell you. So you can grow correctly, like headquarter or mom or dad or whatever are telling you to. So that's the attitude.
Exactly, right. Literally, when it's a parent company.
Exactly, yes.
And you're the child, so you know, until you grow up and become 18, you listen to it, and they'll never grow up, right? They're always a child. So that's, and we have a 6-phase approach. So even with executive coaching, we have these methodologies that we bring in, and one of them within this phases is to really help him to understand what he needs to let go. So we call that release. And then what do we want to fill that with? So releasing with how things he thinks it should go is something he has to release, right? And then helping him to see, what do I want to fill that up with? Is like what ideally, how do I want this to look like? Like how would I like to, how would I like the relationship with my team to look like? Like all those things that we want it, you know, to be. So that's what we call replenish. And then the third part of that is, how can we keep this going? Because it can't be a one-time. It can't be just have one good day. You have to keep it going, right? And keep it continuously going. And also think about, how can it keep on going after I'm gone? That's a little bit longer term.
It needs to become a lifestyle.
Yeah, exactly. So with his leadership, that's something that we went through. So the last phase, we call it rhythm, like the heartbeat. It has to, you know, like a drum. It has to keep on beating. So that's how we helped. And that's how we helped him, how we help our other leaders and teams and organizations. So that release, replenish, and rhythm, and really help him walk through. And that's how, going back to what you said, that's how you really shift from doing into really being, because in order to keep it going, you have to really embody it. It can't be just like a one-night stand or whatever you want to call it, like a one-time thing. And that's obviously when we do, especially with executive coaching, it's more than a 6-month process. So you don't, it's not a one-time thing. Again, it's really, you are relearning, reprogramming how you do things. And it's not easy. They're under a lot of pressure. And that's where our coaches, we have an amazing team of executive coaches who understands. We have people that are experts in Japanese businesses, like you, who are amazing coaches. We have people, coaches that have experienced different cultures or different countries. So that's where really our expertise comes in with global businesses, with intercultural communication and leadership, to really walk them through, you know, this, because it's not easy to do. And that's one thing we would love, especially more Japanese companies, to start doing, is to work with experts. It doesn't have to be us, you know, obviously if it would be us, it'd be great, but working with more executive coaches, because especially with the expats, their term is limited. A lot of Japanese expats typically the longest will be around 5 years because of visa and all that. And in 5 years, what we see a lot of times, the first year just flies by doing nothing, right? Basically suffering, complaining, and trying to figuring things out. And then you've already burned through the first year. And typically what we hear is by the 3rd year, they finally feel like they can start doing things. But then you're already halfway through. So if you can work with someone to expedite that process, and that's something I do think American companies do a little bit better. They really invest, because they see things a little bit more shorter terms, and speed is important. So, but we've worked with a lot of Japanese companies in the US too.
And do you work with those Japanese companies before those managers or leaders come to the US, or do you work when they're already at the subsidiary in the US?
Yeah. So in both cases, we have worked with them when they were in Japan, but typically the companies that we work with already have some kind of programs, trainings that they do.
Yeah.
And the truth is, and you know this probably too, is that what you learn back there typically does not work when you get here. The reality is so different from what we learn in books. So even though, our specialty would say is not so much the pre-training. We have done that. We will do that, but we always tell them, when you hit the ground, it's very different from what you have learned. There might be things that helps, obviously, to know than not know, but because your team members are so different, right? We can't predict how it will look like. So we actually recommend, and this might sound very American, but it's very true because they are in the US. So the first 90 days is critical if they really want to win the trust from their local employees. The first 90 days is so important.
I can tell you from personal experience how it was in the Japanese corporation that I have work experience in, and I've been working there for more than 10 years actually, and I've been working for that company also in Japan for more than 2 years, I think 2.5 years in total. But I've been back and forth between the US, Europe, and Japan. The expatriates, or the Japanese managers or leaders or engineers who come over to overseas operations, they usually get a training at home in Japan, which is called like the general expatriate basic training or boot camp. And then they go through that, and sometimes they're separated into Asia, Europe,
because it's different,
US or Latin America. Sometimes. Then they are, it might have changed, but that's how it was 10 years ago. Then they are dispatched to wherever they have to go. And the first thing that they do, they don't have an official training anymore after that, actually. What they do is they have the local expatriates, they're about to leave, they tell them, all right, this is how things are done. Be nice to that person. Don't bother that person. Be careful with that. That's how it's done. That's how they do it. So there isn't any cross-cultural consult. At least that's how it was back then. But during my time there was a shift towards making the German HR person that was responsible said, we need to understand how to work with Japanese better. So initially they asked me, hey, can you give us some insight? I said, of course, but I'm not a cross-cultural coach. I mean, I've lived there. I can give some insights how I used to do business, how I try to do business with Japanese. But I recommend to hire a cross-cultural coach. And a year later, they actually did. So there was like kind of a seminar that they did with a professional. Now, I think that might have changed because, as you've already mentioned, that Japanese companies want to push towards innovation. They know they need to innovate. The Japanese government is saying that everybody's saying, we need to innovate. We're in Japan, we need to innovate. We need to go back to the days of the glorious days of Sony and Walkman and, But, well, without going there, because those are the so-called old days, as you said. But they know that they need to do that, and they know that there is the one way of innovation is diversity in the team. They understand that, but they're obviously it's not an easy path, but everybody needs to go there. So I know that you've also have like so much experiences, and you lived in basically, well, you grew up in the US, then you moved back to Japan. Then you came back to the US, so you had like a, I don't know, gyaku culture shock, or like a reverse culture shock, or however you want to call it. And when you started in corporate, so you have experience in marketing, you've worked for airlines, you've really a lot of experience in different industries, but also in the US and in Japan. When you actually started out, and I remember that you were saying that it was a coincidence that you decided, oh wow, actually I want to become a coach, was because a friend had asked you to kind of train with her, right? Because she was going through a coaching program. And you realized that that was really something that you were passionate about. Now, you started out as an executive coach.
Yes.
What is something that now, looking back, I think, fast forward 10 years, right?
Yes.
10 years ago?
It is
more than
10
years ago.
Right?
Yeah. Congratulations.
I know, it's scary.
What would be something that you would like to have known before you started out to becoming an executive coach? Is there something that, oh wow, I wish I had known that when I started becoming an executive coach?
Yeah, so I started as an executive coach, and I still do coach but now our company has grown and expanded, that we do executive coaching and we do consulting, we do training, and actually, and typically our projects are combinations of that. We help companies with, the inclusive leadership and inclusive culture. So we do organizational development, help with creating really defining the culture for these companies and all that. So our business has really evolved since then. So at this point, a lot of the executive coaching is really done by my team, and I only work with really selective clients. That said, if I look back and, 10, maybe 11, 12 years ago, when I was kind of thinking about becoming an executive coach and, leave my corporate job and do that, what I would say to myself back then would be, things don't go in the way that you want to, one, but also it doesn't go at the pace, at the timeline that you want it to go. The one thing is that there really is no failure, especially in executive coaching or people that have their own business. And I'll kind of speak from that standpoint, especially if you are interested in doing things on your own. Maybe it's for everyone. There is no failure until you actually quit. And that's one thing, not just going back 10 years ago, but if I would go even further back in the days when I was, a college student and, getting my first job, I would say really, I really wish I took more risks when I was younger. Like that's one thing, and especially as Japanese, taking risk is very hard to do. But when you're younger, there's so many things you could do, right? And no one really remembers what you've done. The only person who actually remembers is yourself. And sometimes I don't even remember what I did. And I just really wish, if there's anything I could go back and tell my younger self, and even 10 years ago when I started this, I wish I took more risks, more bold risks, and really so-called failed or fallen or all that kind of stuff.
Anything specific?
No, nothing specific, but I just think there's so much more, because the truth is you learn more from those than you learn from your wins.
Yes.
The win is a product of something that you've learned from your mistakes or failures or whatever you want to call it, or things that didn't go well. It's just an outcome of that. You don't really learn that much from your wins. I mean, I don't know, you learn, but you don't grow from your wins.
Correct.
So that's where I wish, if I, did crazy stuff back then when I was younger, I just imagine how, life would look different. And I don't regret anything I've done, but I do know there are moments I could have, especially when I was younger, when you had so much time to do more. I mean, today I still want to take risks, especially I want to learn from what I just said. So I want to take more risks. But I would go back and say, just take more risks. Definitely, take bolder steps, because I think a lot of us, and going back to especially Japanese, we care way too much about what other people think of us, way too much, and that really holds us back. So even if as an executive coach when I started out, I think I thought way too much about how it looks, right? How things looks. because I did have a corporate career. I did have a very, very good corporate career. So I couldn't do something lesser than that, whatever lesser actually means, right? Again, that there's no real metrics on that. That's something internally that I have created for myself that really held me back, I think, in doing things that I could have done. So that would be my answer.
Right. Awesome. Now, thank you for sharing something that might be personal to you, and I'd like to keep it in that area. When you look back at what, let's say, belief, habit, or routine you've developed over the past, can be 1 year, can be 5 years, what is something that has really most positively impacted your life?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the elements of our Boundaryless leadership, but it's in there because it has impacted me as a person. Again, person and leadership are the same, right? Because it's a being. Is kansha, so gratitude, and that's one of our very early elements in the framework. So every moment, I truly am grateful. Even at moments that are not going well, I really am grateful for everything. So I always call every misstep, mistake, all of them are gifts that are just telling me something that I can do differently or can do better. Even like the difficult people in your life. There's people that obviously I don't get along, so-called don't get along, but I'm grateful for them for showing certain things that it's either maybe a shortcoming of myself that I don't see when I'm with people that I get along well, because it's easy to go with them and you don't see certain things, or it could be something that actually a reflection of part of my insecurity that creates that it's difficult to be with that person, because it's like a mirror that I see that sometimes you don't want to see, and that's why you don't get along. It has a lot of times has nothing to do with that person. Yeah. So I always really look at everything from that standpoint. Even so a really easy one this morning. So this morning I woke. So today I had a really long day. I was up from 4:30 in the morning. And I had my last call with Japan ended at 11 p.m. So I went to bed at like 12. And I was exhausted because of the long day I had. And I did a video shoot. So I was on all day long, all that kind of stuff. So this morning, I really wanted to sleep in. When I say sleep in, not mean like, 10 or 11 or sleep in, but I wanted to wake up at 7. But I heard this blasting of Cher. And I was like, wait, what time is it? Is it like 1 or 2 a.m.? Like, is it like still late? But I'm like, I know I slept. I looked at the clock. It was 6:30. I'm like, seriously? Like, I wanted to sleep in a little bit more. Like 30 minutes is a long time in the morning. And I'm like, how could Cher be blasting at 6:30 in the morning? But in that moment, I was like, But then I opened my window. I'm staying in a hotel right in front of the beach, and I could see the sunrise. And I'm like, oh, if it wasn't for this, I wouldn't get to see the sunrise. So I was like, okay, I'll wake up. And so I went downstairs and went to the beach and just sat for a little while and looking at the sunrise. So, I actually was grateful that this music was blasting at 6:30 because, I was able to have that special moment. And I know there will be I could easily see there might be people that might call the front desk and just complain.
Yes.
And you can choose to do that. Or you can just, and I'm not saying that what I did is right or wrong, it's just, it serves me because then I could start my day in such a beautiful way and just kind of laugh about the Cher part. And so Cher was my alarm clock this morning. And that really changes, go back to, dealing with difficult people, difficult situations. There's so much, difficulty working with clients, right? Not everything goes well. Or when you're working with your Japanese counterpart or US counterpart and things don't go well. But if you can, instead of looking at it's not going well, if you can really look at it from a place of kansha and gratitude and see like, how can I appreciate this? You know, what beauty is in this? That really shifts, and that really helps to move things. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now, before we closing off, I have 2 questions that are kind of rapid.
Rapid
response questions.
Okay.
One is, if there was one thing that you could change in relation to doing business with Japan, what would that be?
Change me or change them?
Well, you take it from there. It's up to you.
Oh, one thing I would change
about doing business with Japan.
So one thing I would say is, I know you can never change others, so I will not change the other people. One thing I'll change about myself is, I don't know. I can't think of anything, truly. I think I'm in a place of I just take things as is, so I can't think of anything to change.
Okay. What would you change about Japan if you could? When doing business with Japan? Anything?
No.
It's a very diplomatic answer.
No, I mean, truly, it's because that goes back to, goes back to what you said, actually. You talked about it's not right or wrong and just different.
Yes, correct.
And, you know, when you want to change something, it's because you want to change for the good, right? But I think if it's just different, there's no good and bad. So I don't know what to change.
Okay.
You know, and I truly mean this, because typically I have answers for everything. No, I'm kidding. Okay. But I just can't think of it. I mean, one thing I would change, if they can just like, you know, move the whole island a little bit closer to me, that would be really helpful, because flying from Atlanta to Japan is pretty far.
That's all right.
So it's not so much changing them. Actually, I know there's just like the Concorde, there's this new jet or something that's coming that can get to from probably New York to Tokyo. I don't know, 4 hours, 5 hours, maybe even shorter. So I would love that to happen, if anything.
All right. So the logistics
would help.
Okay.
Because it's painful. You know, even if you sit up front, lay flat, doesn't matter. Back, front, still long. It's a long way.
Makes sense. Good. Now, generally speaking, you already mentioned patience is something that you definitely need when doing business with Japan.
Yeah.
What final advice would you give someone that wants to do business with Japan besides the patience?
Yeah. I would really say that build relationships. You know, really look at them as people and not so much business. Because going back to, and it relates to the patience, but it's really all about building relationship. So with that manager, you know, you need to really look at that person as a human. One of the things that's really beautiful about the Japanese culture is that we have a tradition and custom of giving gifts. Right, when we travel, we always bring back something very small. Even in the office, if you have a team, you'll buy like a box of chocolates or whatever. Or even in each region in Japan, every city, they always have their like signature.
It's an industry.
Yeah, whole industry, right? Yeah. And that's a custom, and I think it's so beautiful because what it shows that really care. Like we really were thinking about you while I was gone, and we have other things like that, but. The Japanese culture is really caring. And I think so that really comes through. So, you know, it's not about, so a lot of times it's, and you know this so much better than I do, but it's a lot of times when they choose companies to work with, a lot of times it's not about the price. Right? It's really like, how much do I trust this person through the relationship? They might be a little bit more expensive, but I know they'll do really good for us. So I would really focus on that relationship. And if you don't feel, or if you're not the type of person or business that can invest in the relationship, I would say maybe Japan or Japanese companies are not the right fit for you.
Wonderful. Perfect. I used to have a saying where it's not only the relationship. Japanese companies want to go further than a relationship. They want a partnership.
Absolutely.
So from relationship to partnership, and that's what they're looking for. That's exactly what you mentioned.
So true.
So Nozomi, how can people learn more about you? How can they learn more about Nozomi Morgan and what you do, and to get in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So to learn more about us, and you can reach out at michikimorgan.com. And Michiki Morgan, I'm the only Michiki Morgan out there. It's MICHIKIMORGAN.com. If you want to personally connect with me, I'm happy. I always love meeting people, new people. So you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. And again, I'm probably the only Nozomi Morgan on LinkedIn too. So I think it'll be easy to find me.
I'll put all your links in the description of the video below as well.
Oh, thank you.
So people can get in touch with you.
Yeah.
Okay. That was the Japan Business Show. Thank you so much for joining today, and see you all next time. Thank you so much for joining as well, Nozomi.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
It was a really fun interview.
Yes, it was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you.